In the quiet hours of the night, when the world slows and the mind begins to drift away from the sharp edges of the day, there is a particular kind of story that feels most at home. Not a story that demands attention or shocks the senses, but one that unfolds gently, like distant lights moving slowly across a darkened sky. This is one of those stories. It is not told to convince, persuade, or alarm. It is told to accompany you into rest, to let your thoughts loosen their grip, while something ancient and unresolved quietly lingers in the background. For as long as human beings have looked upward, the sky has carried questions. By day it appears familiar, almost ordinary, but at night it becomes something else entirely, vast, silent, and unknowable. Long before satellites and aircraft traced predictable paths across it, the sky was a place of omens, gods, and mysteries. Even now, in an age of advanced technology and constant surveillance, there are moments when the sky behaves in ways that do not quite fit our expectations. Moments when trained observers pause, hesitate, and later struggle to explain what they witnessed. This story begins not with speculation, but with people. Individuals whose professions required calm under pressure, precision in observation, and strict adherence to procedure. Pilots trained to identify aircraft at great distances. Radar operators accustomed to interpreting complex signals in seconds. Missile officers responsible for weapons that could change the course of history. These are not people encouraged to imagine freely or embellish what they see. In fact, imagination is often treated as a liability in their line of work. And yet, across decades, some of these individuals reported encounters that quietly resisted explanation. What makes these accounts unusual is not just what was seen, but where and by whom. Many of the encounters occurred in restricted military airspace, during routine operations, training exercises, or periods of heightened alert. The witnesses were not seeking attention. Most never spoke publicly until years later, if at all. Some never spoke beyond official reports that were quickly classified, archived, or quietly dismissed. Others carried their experiences privately, unsure whether sharing them would risk their careers, their reputations, or their own sense of certainty. As you listen, there is no need to decide what these encounters were. The human mind often wants answers, conclusions, firm ground. But tonight, this story asks something different. It invites you to simply observe, much like the witnesses themselves did. To notice how patterns emerge slowly, how silence can be as meaningful as explanation, and how uncertainty does not always need resolution to be felt deeply. In the years following the Second World War, the skies changed forever. Aircraft became faster, higher flying, and more secretive. Radar installations spread across continents. Nations watched one another constantly, scanning the horizon for threats that might arrive without warning. In this environment, anything unexpected in the sky carried weight. A blip on a radar screen was not just a curiosity. It could be a warning. A light moving against the wind was not merely strange. It could be dangerous. It was during this era that reports of unidentified aerial phenomena began to surface with unusual consistency. Official language avoided emotional terms. Instead, reports spoke of unknowns, unidentified targets, or anomalous returns. Calm words, carefully chosen. Yet behind those words were moments of genuine confusion. Objects that accelerated too quickly. Craft that seemed to move without visible propulsion. Lights that appeared to respond intelligently to nearby aircraft. Many of these reports were filtered through layers of command, each layer smoothing rough edges, removing uncertainty, and offering explanations that would maintain order. Weather phenomena, sensor malfunctions, experimental aircraft. These explanations were often reasonable, sometimes accurate, and occasionally insufficient. What remained were a small number of cases that refused to settle comfortably into any category. For the individuals involved, the experience often did not end when the encounter did. Some described an enduring sense of unease, not fear, but curiosity mixed with restraint. Others spoke of frustration, knowing that what they had seen did not align with the explanations provided afterward. A few questioned their own perception, replaying the event repeatedly in their minds, searching for missed details or alternative interpretations. Psychologists who study eyewitness memory note that high-stress environments can distort perception, but they also point out that training and repetition can sharpen it. Military personnel are conditioned to notice anomalies, to question what does not fit, and to report without embellishment. This makes their accounts neither infallible nor dismissible. They exist in a quiet middle ground, credible, but incomplete. As this story unfolds, you may notice a deliberate slowness. This is intentional. Just as these encounters often occurred in moments of stillness, late-night shifts, long patrols, silent stretches of sky, the telling of them benefits from patience. Details matter here. The way a radar signal behaved, the angle of approach, the sudden disappearance. These small elements, when considered calmly, create a larger picture that is more unsettling than any dramatic claim. There is also something deeply human in these accounts. Behind every report is a person who returned home, continued their career, raised families, and lived ordinary lives. Yet somewhere in the background, there remained a memory that did not quite fit with everything else they knew to be true. A memory they rarely shared, and when they did, often softened with careful language. This is not a story about invasion or revelation. It is about observation, about moments when certainty faltered briefly, then returned, leaving behind a quiet question. The kind of question that does not demand an answer right away. The kind that can sit comfortably in the mind, especially at night, when the world feels larger and less defined. As you settle further into rest, allow the edges of this story to blur slightly. You do not need to remember every detail. You do not need to hold onto every name or date. Let the atmosphere do the work. Imagine the soft hum of radar equipment, the low murmur of voices in a control room, the steady breathing of a pilot at altitude. Imagine the sky stretching endlessly beyond them, indifferent and silent. In the sections that follow, you will hear about encounters that were documented, debated, and often forgotten by the institutions that recorded them. You will hear about witnesses who spoke only when time had softened the consequences. And you will hear about the spaces between explanations, those quiet gaps where mystery remains not because of belief, but because of restraint. For now, there is nothing to solve, nothing to prove. Only a slow descent into stories carried by the night sky, where questions drift gently, and the unknown does not disturb rest, but deepens it. The period that followed the end of the Second World War marked a subtle but permanent shift in the relationship between humanity and the sky. What had once been a largely open and symbolic space became something carefully monitored, strategically controlled, and deeply politicized. Nations emerged from the war with new technologies, new fears, and a growing awareness that the next conflict, if it came, would arrive not by land or sea, but from above. In this atmosphere of vigilance, secrecy did not simply become policy, it became instinct. As military planners looked upward, they saw vulnerability. Long-range bombers replaced infantry divisions as the primary instruments of power. Radar networks were constructed to provide early warning against surprise attacks, stretching across coastlines, mountain ranges, and remote stretches of land. The sky, once the domain of weather and birds, became a front line. Every unknown object detected on a screen carried potential significance, and every anomaly demanded explanation, at least internally. It was during this early Cold War period that reports of unidentified aerial objects began to increase, not necessarily because such objects were new, but because the tools to detect them had multiplied rapidly. Radar systems, still evolving and imperfect, often produced ambiguous returns. Operators were trained to distinguish between weather patterns, flocks of birds, atmospheric interference, and aircraft. Most anomalies were quickly resolved, but some were not. Some moved in ways that challenged known performance limits. Others appeared briefly, vanished, and reappeared miles away without a traceable path. Officially, these events were rarely framed as mysteries. Military culture favored stability, control, and reassurance. Internally, however, analysts were forced to confront the reality that not everything observed could be neatly categorized. Experimental aircraft programs were expanding rapidly during this time, many of them compartmentalized so strictly that even senior officers were unaware of their existence. This created a strange paradox. One branch of the military might be observing a classified project belonging to another branch, without any authorization to know it. At the same time, foreign adversaries were developing their own technologies. Intelligence agencies worried constantly about surveillance balloons, high-altitude reconnaissance platforms, and novel propulsion systems. The possibility that an unknown object represented foreign technology was often considered more troubling than the idea of something non-human. A human adversary implied intention, strategy, and escalation. And so, many unidentified sightings were quietly filtered through this lens, even when the fit was imperfect. Publicly, governments took a different approach. In the late 1940s and 1950s, brief periods of openness were followed by tightening control over information. Early investigative efforts were established to catalog sightings and assess threats. These initiatives produced reports that were largely technical in nature, focusing on radar data, pilot testimony, and photographic evidence. Yet, as public interest grew, so did concern about panic, distraction, and ridicule. The tone shifted. Explanations became simpler. Curiosity was gently discouraged. Within military installations, this shift was felt personally. Service members learned quickly which topics invited scrutiny and which invited silence. Reporting unusual aerial observations was technically required, but socially complicated. No one wanted to be the individual associated with an unsolved anomaly. Careers were built on reliability, not questions. And so, many encounters were documented clinically, stripped of emotional language, or quietly set aside. The geography of these sightings also mattered. Many occurred near nuclear facilities, missile silos, or test ranges, places already surrounded by layers of secrecy. These were areas where unusual aircraft activity was expected, but also where any unknown presence carried heightened concern. Guards, radar operators, and security personnel were trained to report intrusions. Yet they often found themselves facing something that did not behave like an intruder at all. Objects would hover without sound, accelerate instantly, or disappear without crossing known boundaries. Historians studying this era often note that secrecy had a compounding effect. Each classified program required additional layers of concealment, which in turn increased the likelihood of internal confusion. When an unidentified object was observed, the safest institutional response was often to say as little as possible. Silence preserved authority. Silence maintained order. But silence also allowed questions to linger. The psychological environment of the Cold War cannot be separated from these events. Fear of sudden annihilation was not abstract. It was rehearsed daily. Missile crews practiced launch sequences. Pilots trained for missions they might never return from. Radar operators worked long shifts, scanning for threats that could appear without warning. In this state of constant alert, the human mind was sharpened, but also strained. Ambiguity became a source of discomfort, something to be resolved quickly or suppressed entirely. Yet not all ambiguity could be suppressed. Some encounters were shared quietly among colleagues, discussed in low voices during off hours, then left behind. Others stayed with individuals for years, resurfacing only after retirement, when the pressure to conform had faded. These later accounts often carried a reflective tone, less about fear and more about confusion, about the realization that even the most advanced systems and disciplined minds had encountered limits. Culturally, this era laid the foundation for modern UFO mythology, though the term itself was rarely used within official contexts. Popular media began to explore themes of invasion and hidden knowledge, reflecting collective anxieties rather than specific events. Films and books exaggerated, dramatized, and simplified what were in reality complex and often mundane observations, punctuated by moments of genuine mystery. The distance between public imagination and military experience grew wider, making serious discussion increasingly difficult. Researchers examining declassified materials decades later would note patterns that were invisible at the time. Repeated descriptions of objects with no visible propulsion. Consistent reports of rapid acceleration. The clustering of sightings around strategic sites. None of these patterns proved a single explanation, but together they suggested that something persistent had been observed, even if it remained undefined. It is important to understand that the military's relationship with uncertainty is inherently cautious. Unknowns are not embraced, they are contained. When an explanation cannot be found, it is often labeled provisional, pending further data that may never arrive. This approach maintains functionality, but leaves little room for wonder. And yet wonder persists, not as excitement, but as quiet unease. As this story moves forward, the Cold War skies serve as more than just a backdrop. They represent a time when technology advanced faster than understanding, when secrecy became routine, and when ordinary individuals encountered extraordinary moments without language to fully describe them. The sky was no longer empty, but it was not fully known either. For those who worked beneath it, night after night, scanning, flying, guarding, and listening, the sky became something intimate and distant at the same time. Familiar in its patterns, unpredictable in its exceptions. And it was in those exceptions, brief, unexplained, and officially unresolved, that the foundation for these stories was quietly laid. As you continue listening, allow the pace to remain slow. The events described did not unfold in moments of chaos, but in long stretches of waiting. Hours of calm punctuated by seconds of strangeness. This rhythm, stillness followed by anomaly, then stillness again, will continue throughout the accounts ahead, just as it did for those who first witnessed them. Military personnel have long been regarded as some of the most reliable witnesses to phenomena in the skies. Their training, discipline, and experience create a unique perspective, one rooted in careful observation and immediate interpretation of data. Pilots learn to distinguish subtle differences in aircraft silhouettes and flight patterns. Radar operators study signals with meticulous attention to detail, able to differentiate between atmospheric disturbances, conventional aircraft, and anomalous readings. Missile officers and control room staff are trained to respond to high-stakes situations where errors can have catastrophic consequences. In this environment, credibility is measured not by conviction or imagination, but by the consistent application of learned principles under pressure. The reason military testimony carries weight is precisely because of the structure that surrounds it. Every observation is meant to be reported systematically. Logs, radar recordings, and procedural checklists are part of daily life. Anomalies are flagged, sometimes scrutinized in multiple departments, and often archived for further study. Unlike civilian observers, whose accounts may rely on memory and subjective interpretation, military witnesses operate within frameworks designed to minimize personal bias. This does not guarantee perfection, of course. Human perception is always fallible. But in many cases, the rigor of military procedure significantly enhances the reliability of what is recorded. Consider a fighter pilot on a routine patrol. Their attention is divided between multiple instruments, environmental conditions, and the operation of a high-speed aircraft. They are trained to recognize the subtle cues that distinguish one type of aircraft from another at great distances. They also know how to describe anomalies clearly and without exaggeration, because overstatement in their field can have serious consequences. Radar operators, working alongside pilots or independently, are trained to interpret blips and echoes with precision. They cross-reference multiple readings, and any unusual object that does not fit known parameters is documented meticulously. These practices, repeated thousands of times, build a framework where unusual sightings are not ignored but treated seriously. Yet, the environment in which these observations occur is complex and often fraught with tension. Military personnel are trained to assume that unknown objects represent potential threats. This mindset can sharpen observation, but it can also heighten anxiety. The same object, viewed through different levels of training and responsibility, may produce different interpretations. A pilot may see a craft executing impossible maneuvers, while a radar operator sees only a series of inexplicable signals. Both are correct in describing what they observed, yet neither may be able to explain the phenomenon fully. This interplay between perception, training, and reality is a defining characteristic of military eyewitness accounts. Another important aspect is the culture of silence and discretion. Reporting anomalies can have professional consequences. Careers are built on reliability, adherence to protocol, and the ability to maintain composure. An officer who misreports or exaggerates an event risks credibility, while one who draws attention to unexplained phenomena may face skepticism or censure. As a result, many military witnesses carry their experiences privately for years, sometimes decades, before they feel safe enough to share them. This long period of reflection can enhance the clarity of memory in some cases, as individuals revisit events carefully, removing irrelevant details and focusing on the aspects that were most vivid and inexplicable. Psychologists and researchers who study eyewitness memory often point out that high-stress, high-stakes situations can both sharpen and distort perception. In the military context, however, training tends to favor clarity. Pattern recognition, rapid assessment, and disciplined reporting are emphasized over intuition or personal interpretation. While mistakes still occur, they are usually the result of environmental limitations rather than imaginative exaggeration. For example, a pilot's brief misidentification of a weather balloon is easily caught when corroborated by radar data or fellow observers. Conversely, anomalies that persist across multiple observers and instruments are far more difficult to dismiss. This brings us to the unique intersection of credibility and uncertainty. Military personnel are generally cautious in their conclusions. When a sighting cannot be explained, reports are often labeled unidentified, rather than attributed to speculative causes. This practice contrasts sharply with civilian or media-driven narratives, where interpretation often precedes verification. In the military, the unknown is recorded as unknown. This disciplined restraint ensures that reports are both cautious and precise, and it allows later investigators to approach the data without the distortions of early conjecture. Training also emphasizes situational awareness and contextual understanding. Observers are taught to account for atmospheric conditions, instrument limitations, and environmental cues before arriving at a conclusion. A sudden flash in the sky might be lightning, a reflection, or a missile test, but trained personnel are adept at cross-checking these possibilities. When an anomaly persists despite careful evaluation, it is significant precisely because it survives the filters that normally resolve most uncertainties. In this way, military testimony provides a structured lens through which unusual phenomena are observed and documented. The history of these accounts is also revealing. From the earliest Jet Age encounters to Cold War-era radar incidents, reports often share common characteristics: objects moving with seemingly impossible acceleration, sudden directional changes without visible propulsion, and appearances near restricted or sensitive airspace. While no single account provides definitive proof of anything beyond known technology, the repeated patterns across different branches, time periods, and locations create a compelling body of evidence. Researchers and historians often emphasize this consistency, noting that the convergence of trained observation and unexplained behavior is unusual and worthy of study. It is important to remember that credibility does not imply certainty. Witnesses may provide detailed, accurate descriptions of what they saw, yet still be unable to explain the origin or purpose of the object. This distinction is subtle but significant. The reliability of the report rests on the observer's honesty and procedural rigor, not on the availability of a full explanation. As a result, military accounts often occupy a middle ground, highly credible in detail, yet open-ended in interpretation. Beyond technical expertise, the human element remains central. Witnesses often describe a profound sense of curiosity, tempered by professional responsibility. They may replay the event in their minds, consider alternative explanations, and question their own perceptions. Many express a mixture of wonder, confusion, and humility, the acknowledgement that even the most disciplined observer can encounter phenomena that challenge understanding. These reflections are part of the psychological texture of military testimony, adding depth and authenticity to the accounts. As this story continues, it is important to approach these narratives with both attention and calm. Military eyewitnesses did not set out to thrill or alarm. They observed, recorded, and acted according to procedure. What they report is often subtle, measured, and deliberate. Yet when these small details accumulate across multiple witnesses, decades, and locations, a pattern begins to emerge. One that invites reflection without demanding immediate resolution. In the sections that follow, you will hear these accounts in more detail. You will encounter pilots, radar operators, and control room staff describing moments of brief uncertainty, unusual movement, and sudden disappearance. You will see how structured observation, rigorous training, and disciplined reporting contribute to accounts that are both credible and mysterious. These are not stories of exaggeration or hysteria. They are careful records of encounters that defy easy explanation, presented in the measured, reflective tone of individuals who understood the stakes and the limits of their knowledge. As you listen, allow your mind to move gently through these accounts. Notice the care in observation, the hesitation in explanation, and the quiet persistence of uncertainty. The military witness is a guide in this landscape, not a source of fear, but a bridge between what is known and what remains unresolved. And as the night stretches on, this careful observation becomes an invitation to consider the sky not only as a backdrop for human activity, but as a space where discipline, curiosity, and mystery coexist in delicate balance. The moments that would later be documented as some of the most compelling military UFO encounters often began in the quietest of circumstances. A pilot on a routine training sortie, a radar operator scanning the horizon for standard traffic, or a missile crew monitoring a secure range. All of them were immersed in ordinary procedures when something entirely unexpected appeared. These encounters did not happen during emergencies or dramatic crises. They occurred within the rhythm of normal operations, which perhaps makes them even more striking. The calm of the night, the familiarity of routine, and the expectation of predictability set the stage for experiences that would quietly unsettle those involved. One early account comes from a jet pilot stationed at a strategic airbase in the late 1950s. On a clear evening, while conducting a training maneuver at high altitude, the pilot observed a cluster of lights moving in formation, seemingly without regard to atmospheric resistance or speed limits of any known aircraft. Instruments registered no anomalies, yet visual confirmation was undeniable. Attempting to intercept, the pilot described sudden bursts of acceleration from the lights, movements that defied known aeronautical principles. Even after returning to base and debriefing, there was no official explanation. Radar logs were inconclusive, leaving only the pilot's meticulous notes and a persistent memory of an object that moved too differently to ignore. Another notable incident occurred in a radar control center during the early 1960s. Operators monitoring airspace over a restricted test site detected a series of blips appearing suddenly, moving erratically, and then disappearing entirely. Initially, the team considered atmospheric anomalies or instrumentation errors, but the patterns persisted over several minutes and were confirmed by multiple independent radar channels. Simultaneously, a nearby flight crew reported seeing lights moving in similar patterns. The correlation between visual observation and radar data elevated the credibility of the encounter, yet it remained officially unidentified. The operators later described a quiet tension, a mixture of curiosity, professional diligence, and the unspoken realization that what they were observing was unlike anything they had trained to recognize. Naval personnel also contributed to the archive of unexplained encounters. In one case, a vessel patrolling an isolated region noted objects moving just above the surface of the water, reflecting light in ways inconsistent with conventional vessels or aircraft. The objects appeared to respond to the ship's movements, yet their origin, speed, and trajectory could not be accounted for. Witnesses reported a profound sense of disorientation. The familiar horizon felt altered, and time seemed to stretch during the observation. Subsequent analysis of the vessel's instruments confirmed unusual readings, but no physical traces of the objects were found. These accounts highlight a recurring pattern: multiple observers, both visual and instrumental, encountering phenomena that resist conventional explanation. Missile crews, responsible for monitoring sensitive areas, also reported unexplained occurrences. During the height of the Cold War, some crews observed objects maneuvering near missile silos with speeds and trajectories that defied standard aerodynamics. The objects were often described as silent, precise, and sometimes luminous, yet their behavior suggested intentionality. Protocol dictated immediate reporting, but formal explanations were rarely provided. Internal memos would classify the incidents, noting that while no immediate threat could be verified, the origin and nature of the objects remained unknown. Crews often reflected privately on the strangeness, grappling with the tension between professional obligation and personal experience. Several accounts reveal a pattern of repeated sightings in clusters over time. For example, radar and pilot reports during the 1970s noted recurring observations over strategic corridors. Witnesses described similar behaviors: abrupt accelerations, hovering without visible propulsion, and movement in ways that defied conventional physics. These repeated patterns across different regions and branches of service suggest that the phenomena were not isolated or random. Historians and researchers analyzing these incidents have emphasized that the consistency across independent reports strengthens their credibility, highlighting that multiple trained observers witnessed similar anomalies in different contexts. Psychological factors also play a role in understanding these encounters. Witnesses often reported a strange sense of calm mixed with heightened attention. Training prepares military personnel to respond to anomalies without panic. Yet the unusual nature of these encounters created a subtle cognitive tension. Observers noted a heightened awareness of the environment. Every movement, every light, every radar blip became significant. This state of alertness, combined with professional discipline, produced accounts that are both detailed and restrained, emphasizing factual observation over speculation. Some incidents involved multiple layers of corroboration, adding further credibility. In one example, a high-altitude reconnaissance pilot reported a glowing object performing maneuvers impossible for any known aircraft. Within minutes, a nearby radar station recorded similar anomalies, and ground-based observers reported visual confirmation. Attempts to approach or intercept the object were unsuccessful, as it seemed to respond unpredictably yet deliberately. Debriefings later confirmed that instruments, logs, and eyewitness testimony all aligned, creating a record that remained classified for decades. Even with the passage of time, witnesses described a lingering sense of wonder, noting that the encounter challenged both their professional assumptions and personal understanding of the world. In every one of these 12 accounts, a common thread emerges: careful observation of events that exceed known technological and physical limits. These are not stories of imagination, exaggeration, or misperception. They are meticulously documented encounters involving trained, disciplined, and highly reliable observers. Each report includes precise descriptions of flight characteristics, timing, environmental conditions, and instrumentation, reinforcing the reality of the events. It is also notable how these encounters often occur in moments of routine. The mundanity of everyday operations contrasts sharply with the extraordinary nature of the phenomena. This juxtaposition heightens the impact of the experience for the witnesses, who must reconcile the ordinary flow of their duties with the presence of something entirely unfamiliar. The calm, methodical approach taken by these individuals underscores the reliability of their testimony, even as the phenomena defy conventional explanation. Finally, the long-term impact on the witnesses themselves is significant. Many describe a persistent curiosity, a cautious openness to possibilities, and a deep respect for the unknown. These encounters often stayed with them for years, shaping their understanding of the skies without provoking fear or panic. In reflecting on these experiences, they emphasize the importance of accuracy, honesty, and careful observation, rather than sensationalism. Their stories are not designed to shock or alarm. They are records of extraordinary events experienced within ordinary life, shared with a calmness that invites both reflection and rest. As this narrative moves forward, it is clear that the 12 accounts collectively form a pattern, one that cannot be dismissed as random error or coincidence. Multiple observers, independent verification, consistent behaviors, and meticulous documentation create a body of evidence that is compelling, even if it remains officially unexplained. These encounters form the heart of the story, offering a rare glimpse into moments when the ordinary routines of military life intersected with phenomena that continue to challenge understanding. In the quiet of a night, as you imagine these observers scanning the sky, note the calm and measured nature of their experience. They do not panic, they do not embellish. They observe, record, and reflect. And through their testimony, we are invited to share a moment of uncertainty. A reminder that even in the most controlled environments, the sky can harbor mysteries that endure, waiting quietly for those patient enough to witness them. Even after multiple corroborated sightings and meticulously documented encounters, the response from official institutions often remained cautious, measured, and deliberately opaque. Military and government agencies faced a difficult balance. On one hand, they had trained personnel reporting experiences that defied conventional explanation. On the other, they had a responsibility to maintain public confidence, operational security, and national stability. The tension between internal acknowledgement and external silence created a landscape in which many credible events were effectively shelved, classified, or reframed. Understanding this dynamic is essential to appreciating why some encounters, despite their rigor and documentation, remain unresolved in the public record. Official investigations into unidentified aerial phenomena date back decades, though their scope and tone have varied over time. In the late 1940s and 1950s, the United States Air Force initiated programs designed to collect, analyze, and categorize reports. Project Sign, Project Grudge, and later Project Blue Book exemplify the institutional approach, systematic, structured, and heavily data-driven. These programs often focused on establishing whether sightings represented a potential national security threat, with a strong bias toward conventional explanations. Weather balloons, astronomical phenomena, experimental aircraft, and sensor malfunctions were frequently cited as explanations in official reports. Yet even the most thorough investigations sometimes concluded with unidentified, acknowledging cases that resisted explanation. Military personnel who had reported anomalies often found themselves navigating a complex bureaucracy. Submission of a report was only the first step. It would be reviewed by multiple layers of command, sometimes reaching analysts who lacked direct access to all corroborating data. In some cases, inconsistencies between radar readings, visual observations, and environmental conditions were noted, but not fully reconciled publicly. Debriefing officers might provide immediate reassurance, emphasizing that no immediate threat was detected, while omitting discussion of anomalies that did not fit known categories. This layered response, intended to maintain operational stability, often left witnesses with partial answers, creating an internal sense of ambiguity. The language used in official communications is particularly noteworthy. Documents emphasize precision, objectivity, and neutrality, frequently avoiding emotive or speculative language. Terms such as unidentified aerial phenomenon or anomalous target became standard, reflecting a cautious recognition of events that did not fit established categories. This deliberate wording conveys both acknowledgement and restraint. It signals that the reports are taken seriously without encouraging sensationalism. Over time, these carefully constructed phrases became central to understanding how institutions manage events that lie beyond conventional understanding. Media reporting also influenced perception, but often in contradictory ways. Early press coverage of military sightings ranged from dismissive to sensational, reflecting the gap between public curiosity and institutional reticence. In some instances, journalists obtained leaks or declassified snippets, presenting them with dramatic headlines that emphasized mystery and intrigue. Conversely, official statements frequently downplayed the significance of sightings, citing conventional explanations or attributing anomalies to misperception. This tension between public narrative and internal acknowledgement created a landscape in which credible witnesses could appear unreliable in the eyes of the wider audience, even when their accounts were rigorously documented. Historians studying these events note the profound impact of classification and secrecy on understanding. Some encounters that later became widely cited were initially recorded in internal memos, radar logs, or briefings, but never disseminated beyond closed channels. Personnel who observed unusual phenomena were often instructed not to discuss them outside the chain of command, effectively limiting opportunities for cross-verification. As a result, the institutional memory of these events was sometimes fragmented, leaving gaps that researchers decades later have struggled to reconstruct. The combination of secrecy, hierarchical reporting, and selective public disclosure contributed to a pattern in which credible reports existed but remained largely invisible to the broader world. Within this context, the experience of the witnesses themselves is significant. Many describe a sense of professional duty to record and report accurately, even in the absence of explanation. At the same time, they often experience frustration or uncertainty, aware that their observations did not align with standard narratives. For some, the lack of closure produced a persistent curiosity, a private engagement with questions that official channels could not answer. Others internalized the ambiguity, treating it as a matter of professional discretion, understanding that some mysteries are preserved precisely because they are unresolved. It is also notable how the categorization of events evolved over time. Earlier projects, such as Project Grudge, often prioritized debunking or rationalizing reports, framing unexplained phenomena as misinterpretations or technical errors. By contrast, later initiatives recognized the value of unidentified classifications as legitimate documentation. Analysts emphasize patterns, recurrence, and corroboration across multiple data sources, acknowledging that unresolved incidents warranted continued attention. This shift reflects a gradual institutional recognition that not all anomalies could be immediately explained, even with advanced technology and trained personnel. While some cases were quietly shelved, others prompted internal investigation and cross-branch consultation. Analysts compared radar data with pilot logs, consulted atmospheric scientists, and reviewed satellite imagery where available. Yet the results were often inconclusive. Instruments verified unusual readings, observers confirmed visual anomalies, but no definitive identification emerged. These persistent unknowns underscore a central challenge. Within highly structured and methodical institutions, the unknown is both fascinating and uncomfortable. It is studied rigorously, yet must also be contained within protocols that prioritize clarity and predictability. The implications of official silence extend beyond operational considerations. Socially, it influenced public understanding of aerial phenomena, shaping attitudes toward legitimacy and credibility. For decades, the prevailing narrative suggested that UFO encounters were largely the domain of enthusiasts or the misinformed, despite the existence of meticulously documented military reports. This dichotomy between institutional knowledge and public perception created an enduring tension. Events that were credible and significant internally were simultaneously dismissed, misunderstood, or sensationalized externally. Some researchers argue that this tension also affects the ongoing discourse around unidentified aerial phenomena. When official reports are released or declassified, they are often partially edited, or framed in ways that emphasize uncertainty over evidence. Analysts, historians, and journalists must then interpret these documents cautiously, balancing acknowledgement of unexplained events with skepticism about incomplete information. For the audience, this produces a layered understanding. The phenomena are real in terms of observation, yet remain mysterious in explanation. Perhaps the most striking aspect of official response is its quiet acknowledgement of limitations. Internal memos and investigative reports frequently note when cases cannot be reconciled with known technology, atmospheric conditions, or observational error. They recognize that trained personnel using precise instruments have encountered events that defy simple categorization. This restraint, far from diminishing credibility, actually reinforces the significance of the encounters. It indicates that institutions are aware of the unknown and approach it with methodical care, rather than sensational exaggeration. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that official silence is not equivalent to denial. Rather, it is a carefully managed response to the intersection of public expectation, operational security, and institutional responsibility. Observers documented events, institutions recorded them, and the public often remained unaware. Within these layers, patterns emerge. Repeated behaviors, corroborated sightings, and meticulous reporting, all quietly preserved. These patterns suggest that the phenomena are persistent, systematic, and worthy of continued attention, even when formal explanations are absent. For the listener, this section offers a reflection on the interplay between observation and acknowledgement. The encounters themselves are fascinating, but equally important is the way institutions respond, with caution, discipline, and restraint. The result is a body of credible, detailed reports that exist in parallel to public narratives, creating a hidden archive of experiences that challenge understanding while maintaining order. As the story moves forward, the focus will shift from official channels to rational and alternative explanations. Yet the weight of institutional response remains an essential backdrop. The combination of careful documentation, measured reporting, and procedural restraint provides a foundation of credibility against which subsequent analysis can be understood. The silence in this context is not emptiness. It is a space where uncertainty is preserved, patterns are recorded, and mystery quietly persists, inviting both reflection and curiosity. In exploring the phenomena described by military personnel, it is essential to consider rational explanations that may account for at least some of the encounters. These explanations do not dismiss the credibility of the witnesses or the validity of their observations. Rather, they provide a framework for understanding anomalies within the boundaries of known physics, technology, and environmental conditions. By carefully examining experimental craft, foreign technological developments, and human perceptual limitations, we can gain insight into the complexities of these encounters while maintaining respect for the integrity of the original reports. One of the most significant factors in assessing sightings is the rapid advancement of experimental aircraft during the mid to late 20th century. The post-World War II era marked an unprecedented period of aeronautical innovation. Jet propulsion, swept-wing designs, and high-altitude flight capabilities created aircraft with performance characteristics previously considered impossible. Many of these programs were highly classified, meaning that even military personnel within different branches or units could observe unusual activity without being aware of its origin. For example, the U-2 spy plane, introduced in the 1950s, flew at altitudes far exceeding commercial aircraft, while the later development of the State Route 71 Blackbird pushed speed and maneuverability to levels unfamiliar to most observers. When seen unexpectedly, such aircraft could easily be misinterpreted as unidentified phenomena, particularly at night or from long distances. Foreign technology also played a role. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union conducted secretive research into advanced aviation and missile systems. Reconnaissance flights, experimental drones, and high-altitude reconnaissance balloons could appear suddenly on radar or visually, moving in ways that seemed unconventional or even impossible. Analysts reviewing historical incidents have noted that many unidentified reports coincided geographically and temporally with testing corridors for experimental aircraft. The presence of foreign adversary technologies, often unknown to local personnel, introduced a layer of complexity to the interpretation of sightings, creating situations in which highly trained observers were confronted with objects that did not match any known catalog of aircraft. Environmental and atmospheric phenomena also offer explanations for certain observations. Temperature inversions, cloud reflections, and unusual light refraction can create visual illusions that appear to move against wind currents or accelerate unpredictably. Radar systems are not immune to these effects. Anomalous returns, caused by atmospheric density variations or ionospheric disturbances, can produce signals that mimic rapid movement or sudden disappearance. While these natural phenomena cannot account for every encounter, they are important considerations when analyzing reports, particularly those involving brief or single observer sightings. In some cases, what appears to be an intelligent maneuver may be a misinterpretation of complex environmental conditions interacting with conventional aircraft or radar systems. Human perception is another critical factor. Even trained military personnel are subject to the limitations of visual acuity, depth perception, and cognitive processing under stress or fatigue. Observing an unfamiliar object at high speed under variable lighting conditions, or while performing demanding operational tasks, can result in subtle distortions of scale, distance, and motion. Psychologists studying eyewitness testimony emphasize that confidence in perception does not always equate to accuracy. The mind can fill in gaps, unconsciously impose patterns, or misjudge velocity and trajectory. Importantly, these perceptual effects occur alongside procedural rigor and careful documentation, meaning that the reports themselves remain credible even if human interpretation introduces uncertainty. Misidentification of known objects is another rational consideration. Satellites, weather balloons, commercial aircraft, and even celestial bodies, like Venus, have all been documented as sources of initial confusion. In several historical cases, initial reports of high-speed objects were later attributed to classified reconnaissance satellites or secret experimental craft. Yet even with such identifications, the manner in which these objects were perceived through lights, radar echoes, or optical instruments could create an initial impression of anomaly, especially when multiple observers interpreted the event in real time. These instances underscore the importance of cross-referencing visual and instrumental data when analyzing sightings. Military analysts often attempt to categorize events using a process of elimination, first considering conventional explanations, then ruling out perceptual errors, before arriving at the classification of unidentified. This systematic approach reflects both rigor and caution. Many incidents that remained unresolved were not the result of sloppy reporting. They survived careful scrutiny precisely because they did not fit any conventional model. The recurrence of certain behaviors, such as abrupt acceleration, instantaneous directional changes, and silent hovering, presents challenges to purely rational explanations. Yet the disciplined methods of military observers provide a reliable dataset from which analysts can draw comparisons and test hypotheses. In evaluating these events, it is also important to consider the technological limitations of the era. Early radar systems, while advanced for their time, were prone to glitches, reflections, and false positives. Multiple independent confirmations, visual sightings coinciding with radar data, are far more compelling than single-source reports. Yet even these combined data points can present ambiguity. Instrumentation error does not necessarily negate the credibility of the observer. Instead, it highlights the complexity of interpreting events in real time, especially when multiple, interacting variables are involved. The broader historical context reinforces the rational framework. The Cold War created conditions in which unexpected aerial phenomena were increasingly likely to appear. High-speed tests, experimental prototypes, foreign surveillance, and environmental anomalies were all present simultaneously. Witnesses encountering these phenomena were trained to report precisely, but the dynamic and secretive nature of the technology around them meant that even careful observation could yield data that appeared inexplicable. Analysts reviewing these cases must account for both human and technological variables, recognizing that rational explanations exist alongside genuine gaps in knowledge. Despite these explanations, some encounters continue to defy categorization. Cases in which multiple independent observers, both visual and instrumental, report consistent anomalies that cannot be accounted for by known technology, environmental conditions, or perceptual error, challenge conventional frameworks. These instances occupy a unique space. They are methodically recorded, rigorously observed, and resistant to standard explanation. Analysts, historians, and scientists studying these events acknowledge the significance of these unresolved cases, noting that rational hypotheses, while applicable to many incidents, do not eliminate the presence of truly enigmatic phenomena. The study of these rational explanations does not seek to diminish the mystery, but rather to provide a balanced perspective. Understanding experimental aircraft, foreign technology, atmospheric effects, perceptual limitations, and instrumentation errors allows us to appreciate the conditions under which sightings occur, while also recognizing that some encounters remain anomalous. Military personnel consistently demonstrate careful observation, disciplined documentation, and professional restraint. Their reports provide a structured foundation for analysis, ensuring that even when explanations are incomplete, the phenomena themselves are treated with credibility and seriousness. In approaching this material, it is important to maintain a calm, measured perspective. Rational explanations coexist with uncertainty. Acknowledging one does not negate the other. By considering experimental craft, foreign technology, atmospheric conditions, and human perception, we build a framework that respects both the credibility of the observers and the persistence of anomalies. The result is a nuanced understanding. Some sightings may indeed have conventional explanations, yet others resist interpretation, inviting reflection on the limits of knowledge, technology, and human perception. As this story continues, the focus will shift toward alternative interpretations and more speculative frameworks. However, the grounding in rational explanations remains essential. It allows us to differentiate between the explainable and the unexplained, providing context for encounters that challenge conventional understanding while maintaining the credibility of the witnesses who first observed them. The balance between reason and mystery is central to the experience of these events, and it is this interplay that shapes both the narrative and the listener's journey into the unknown. As we consider the range of encounters described by military personnel, it becomes clear that not every phenomenon fits neatly into conventional frameworks. While some sightings can plausibly be attributed to experimental aircraft, atmospheric anomalies, or perceptual limitations, a subset of reports challenges these rational explanations. These cases invite us to explore alternative hypotheses, models that extend beyond human technology and even beyond the traditional bounds of physics. In doing so, it is important to maintain a measured, analytical tone, approaching speculation with both curiosity and restraint, recognizing that these interpretations are attempts to expand understanding rather than assertions of certainty. One such framework considers the possibility of interdimensional phenomena. The idea that what is observed in our skies might originate from a reality beyond conventional perception challenges deeply ingrained assumptions. Physicists studying the theoretical properties of spacetime have proposed that the universe may include multiple layers or dimensions, some of which might interact with our own in subtle ways. If certain objects or entities exist primarily in a dimension not normally accessible to humans, their appearances could be sporadic, unpredictable, and seemingly impossible by the standards of known technology. Multiple accounts from military personnel describe objects that appear and disappear instantaneously, perform abrupt directional changes, and traverse distances faster than known aircraft could manage, all characteristics that might align with interdimensional hypotheses. Another avenue of exploration involves consciousness-related interpretations. Some researchers propose that the perception of these phenomena may not be entirely separable from the observer. In this model, the observer's cognitive processes, expectations, and state of awareness interact with the environment in subtle ways, producing experiences that are real, verifiable, and yet influenced by the mind's interaction with unknown forces. These hypotheses do not imply fabrication or hallucination. Rather, they suggest that human consciousness may play a role in accessing information about phenomena that lie beyond conventional measurement. Military witnesses, whose training emphasizes observation and data collection, may be particularly attuned to these interactions, resulting in detailed reports that resist easy explanation while remaining credible. The possibility of non-human intelligence also arises in the analysis of these encounters. Across decades and branches of the military, observers have described behavior suggestive of intent or awareness. Objects adjusting their trajectory in response to aircraft, hovering in precise positions, or performing coordinated maneuvers across multiple units. While these behaviors could theoretically be mimicked by advanced experimental technology, the repeated occurrence across time and location suggests an alternative consideration: the presence of an intelligence operating with goals and capabilities not currently understood by human engineering. It is a hypothesis that requires neither belief in a particular origin nor assumptions about motive. It is simply a framework to account for observed patterns that remain otherwise inexplicable. Historical parallels offer context for considering these alternative hypotheses. Throughout history, cultures have reported anomalous aerial phenomena, often interpreted through the lens of prevailing cosmology, religion, or philosophy. Lights in the sky, objects that moved against natural patterns, and unexplained sounds were often recorded in chronicles and personal accounts. While historical reports were limited by technology and understanding, they share certain commonalities with modern military sightings: unexpected appearances, behaviors inconsistent with known mechanisms, and a sense of mystery that lingers after the encounter. This continuity across centuries suggests that some aspects of these phenomena may not be strictly technological, but rather persistent in the broader landscape of human observation. It is also important to consider the cultural resistance to these ideas. Even within scientific and military circles, proposals involving interdimensionality, consciousness interactions, or non-human intelligence are often met with skepticism or dismissal. Historical instances exist in which serious researchers were discouraged from pursuing lines of inquiry that challenged conventional paradigms. This institutional caution reflects both the strength of established scientific frameworks and the understandable difficulty of testing hypotheses that, by definition, operate at the edges of empirical verification. Yet, despite the skepticism, some researchers continue to explore these models, developing theoretical frameworks and experimental designs that attempt to bridge the gap between observation and explanation. The speculative frameworks are not without precedent in scientific inquiry. Concepts such as quantum entanglement, higher dimensional physics, and the theoretical limits of human perception suggest that reality may be far more complex than everyday experience implies. While these ideas are still largely theoretical, they provide a context in which seemingly impossible phenomena might be considered without dismissing credibility. Military encounters that involve instantaneous disappearance, rapid acceleration, or anomalous behavior could, in principle, intersect with these areas of study, offering a broader lens through which to understand patterns that defy conventional analysis. Eyewitness testimony remains central to exploring these alternative hypotheses. Military personnel report specific, reproducible patterns, objects appearing suddenly, maintaining stability under conditions that should destabilize conventional craft, and executing maneuvers that suggest precision control. When corroborated by radar, infrared, or photographic evidence, these accounts gain additional credibility, even if the underlying mechanism remains unclear. The reports themselves provide a structured dataset, allowing theorists to examine correlations, behavioral patterns, and statistical anomalies in ways that purely anecdotal accounts cannot support. It is worth noting that these alternative interpretations do not necessarily contradict rational explanations. In many cases, phenomena that initially appear interdimensional, conscious, or intelligent may later be correlated with previously unknown technology or environmental factors. However, by considering a wider array of possibilities, analysts are better equipped to avoid premature conclusions and to maintain openness to the unknown. The careful consideration of speculative frameworks encourages a mindset in which mystery is approached methodically, with attention to detail, consistency, and credibility. From a psychological perspective, these frameworks may also help explain why witnesses perceive anomalies in the first place. The human brain is exceptionally adept at pattern recognition, threat assessment, and anomaly detection. In high-stress, high-attention environments, observers may notice subtle deviations from expected patterns, reinforcing the sense of intentionality or anomaly. Military personnel, trained to observe and report systematically, provide an invaluable window into these phenomena, allowing researchers to differentiate between perceptual artifacts and genuine anomalies. In other words, even when alternative hypotheses are considered, the disciplined structure of military observation ensures that the reported events remain anchored in careful, repeatable observation rather than imagination or hysteria. As the narrative moves forward, it is important to approach these alternative interpretations with calm curiosity. The interdimensional, consciousness-related, and non-human intelligence frameworks are not intended to replace conventional analysis, but to expand the conceptual space in which these events are examined. By doing so, they acknowledge the limitations of current technology and understanding while preserving the credibility and detail of the original eyewitness accounts. This balance between speculation and rigor allows the listener to engage with the mystery without fear or skepticism, creating an atmosphere in which wonder and reflection coexist. Ultimately, these frameworks encourage us to view the phenomena not as isolated curiosities, but as a persistent feature of human observation across time. Whether the explanation lies in dimensions beyond our perception, subtle interactions of consciousness, or intelligence yet to be understood, the consistency and detail of military encounters invite serious consideration. They suggest that the unknown is not merely an absence of knowledge, but an active frontier, a space where observation, curiosity, and disciplined reporting intersect. As you listen, allow yourself to consider these possibilities gently, without the urgency of needing answers. The night sky, like the mind, can hold questions without resolution, and the stories of trained observers offer a rare opportunity to explore uncertainty with both credibility and calm. These frameworks do not demand belief, they invite reflection. They suggest that the universe and our understanding of it may be far more intricate than any single explanation can encompass. In this quiet contemplation, mystery becomes both comforting and profound, allowing the imagination to stretch without disrupting the serenity of the night.